Okay, welcome back. I'm excited and thrilled to bring to you this segment about Cristero Hero General Gorostieta. Here's a picture of him right here, and he is the star of the movie For Greater Glory, which I encourage you to buy on Amazon or get the video somehow and watch this movie. The actor is Andy Garcia, which he does a great job in this movie. He really does a fantastic job. Eva Longoria is also in the movie, and she plays his wife in the movie. And here's a picture of General Gorostieta and his wife in their life. All right, here we go. Religion was a vital part of the Cristeros. Here's pictures of the Cristeros. They're Mexican cowboys, and they're Indians too. They're faithful Indian Catholics. See, the Indians, the Aztec Indians and the Indians of Mexico converted by a miraculous appearance of Our Lady of Guadalupe. The Virgin Mary appeared in 1531, which created a miraculous conversion of the Aztec Indians to Catholicism, to Christ in Mexico. The Cristero soldiers carried banners of Jesus. Here's a banner right here, and also banners that say Viva Cristo Rey, and also banners of Our Lady of Guadalupe as well when they would go into battle. The Cristeros were faithful, devout Catholics and would meditate on biblical texts that came from oral tradition and the liturgy of the Mass. This kept their morale high, which they had a big advantage over the anti-Catholic federal fascist government. Those troops didn't have faith, and the desertion rate was extremely high for the anti-Catholic forces. The rural Catholic people viewed this state, this fascist state, this totalitarian state as a tyrant, a King Herod, an antichrist, a devil whose kingdom was manifested in the brutal persecution of the Catholic Church in Mexico. The government, who named this band of rebels Cristeros, like to mock these rebels, actually gave the Cristeros their glorious name. The Knights of Columbus had its own perils in Mexico. To be a knight, one had to be a practicing Catholic. A man by the name of Yacundo Duran was captured by he was simply walking home in January of 1927, minding his own business, when Federal General Valles, who had just come out of a tavern, spotted Duran. Valles had one of his soldiers go over and ask Duran if he was a member of the Knights of Columbus. Duran affirmed, asking, was there anything evil in that? Duran was immediately shot and executed on the spot with no trial for simply being a Knight of Columbus. Over 20 of the 90 priests that were executed and martyred in Mexico were members of the Knights of Columbus. The Knights had to go underground in Mexico and made efforts to educate the American people of the atrocities being committed against Catholics in Mexico. Allow me to share with you Cristero legend General Gorostieta. Here's a picture here. Here's a picture of General Gorostieta meeting General Vega right here. And then also here's a picture of General Vega as well. So they worked hand in hand together. Enrique, that was his first name. Enrique Gorostieta became the youngest general in Mexico prior to the Cristero Wars. At age 27, his early military career was ruined when he fought on the losing side of a war for Mexico won by the Constitutionalists. It's called the War of the Generals. See, who ruled Mexico was the person that was in charge of the military. There was only one political party at the end of the day in 1926. And who controlled the military ran the government. The League, which was an organization of Catholics in Mexico, they were very concerned because many of the Cristeros were getting slaughtered. So what they needed was a leader for the rebels to fight for religious freedom. So they recruited General Gorostieta, which they talk about that in the movie For Greater Glory. So they recruited him in July of 1927. He was actually working in a soap factory, which made him absolutely miserable. Here he was, this great, brilliant general, and he was working in a soap factory. So when they came to him, he detested that job, and he finally took them up on their offer. Gorostieta was a brilliant military general who was, in fact, a very devout Catholic. They don't really show him as a devout Catholic in the movie For Greater Glory, but in his heart, he had a strong faith. And you'll hear him say Viva Cristo Rey in the movie. He was not a Freemason. He detested the regimes of Obregon and Calles and jumped at the opportunity to be the commander-in-chief of the Cristeros. Gorostieta quickly gained the loyalty and respect of about half the Cristeros and was a perfect fit. As a military theorist and outstanding soldier, General Gorostieta jumped at the opportunity and actually relished this opportunity to lead the underdogs, okay? He took this group of underdog Cristero freedom forces, and he learned to admire and love the Cristeros. With these humble fighters, Gorostieta engaged in guerrilla warfare, using every advantage of terrain and surprise against the larger federal forces. And one good thing about the Cristeros is they had a superior cavalry. Okay, they were excellent horsemen. The federal forces were more of an European-style infantry. Gorostieta also appreciated the support and assistance of the Women's Brigade. I talked about that in a previous segment, led by Maria Goyaz, featured in the movie For Greater Glory, this group of brave Mexican women, known as the Women's Brigade, who helped supply the Cristeros with ammunition, medical, intelligence, a number of things. They maximized their zeal, these women, for essential activities. When the League attempted to bring the brigade under its control, Gorostieta stood up for the women, along with General Michel, and he praised the brigade and reprimanded the League for disrupting the vital work of these women. He says, get out of their way. You don't need to manage them. Let them, they're doing just fine on themselves. After some defeats suffered in spring of 1927, the Cristeros under General Gorostieta learned how to fight and became difficult to beat. It's important for me to mention that unfortunately the United States government had oil interests in Mexico and allied itself with the anti-Catholic government, the fascist government of Mexico, and the U.S. government supplied the fascist totalitarian government of Mexico with ammunition, guns, aircraft to assist them to conquer the Catholics in Mexico. The Cristeros gained momentum when General Gorostieta joined their cause. General Gorostieta quickly became familiar with the Cristeros and gained an understanding of the most effective tactics to use. He began by testing his strategies from September of 1927 to February of 1928. General Gorostieta was able to extend his influence to 6 states in Mexico and became the national leader of this freedom war. Here's a little map of Mexico. It's kind of the central part of Mexico, but if you look right here towards the west, the Cristeros controlled this, and the Cristeros actually had a capital city. It's hard to pronounce, Huayquila el Alto in the state of Jalisco. So the Cristeros controlled Zacatecas, Aguascalientes, Guadalajara, southern Jalisco, Colima, this whole area. And the federal government controlled Mexico City. So he was able to gain a lot of territory, having success. By November of 1927, the federal anti-Catholic government could not hold Jalisco. By late January of 1928, Secretary of War Amaro had to request more troops, planes, and funds to fight off the Cristeros, who had now spread to 13 states in Mexico. There was a strong possibility that Gorostieta could actually win this war, and there was a strong possibility that Mexico could become a Catholic nation. And this concerned our government, the United States, under the Monroe Doctrine. For some reason, they were concerned about the Catholic Church having control of Mexico for some reason. We believe it's because of the saturation of Freemasonry in the Mexican fascist government and in the United States government, where part of Freemasonry states that they would defeat the Pope. They'd never want to see the Catholic Church ever succeed in the world. Freemasonry is an anti-Catholic spirituality which mixes all different demonic spirituality together. They actually worship Lucifer in Freemasonry. That's what the G stands for. They call the higher power of Freemasonry the great architect of the universe. Masons do not worship the Trinity. They worship the great architect of the universe, which is Lucifer. Watch my videos on Freemasonry, by the way. So anyhow, getting back to General Gorostieta. Gorostieta wrote, "Our struggle continues to grow well. The Cristeros now numbered 35,000 able, capable fighting soldiers. The anti-Catholic Masonic federal government in Mexico was first helped by the Coolidge administration in the United States. When the Coolidge administration supplied this fascist, totalitarian, anti-Catholic government with rifles, machine guns, ammunition, aircraft, bombs for the aircraft, and airplanes totaling over $1 million US back in the 1920s, which that was a lot of money. Interestingly enough, is it any wonder why we had a stock market collapse and a Great Depression? Was that divine justice in the United States? I'll let you decide that. The U.S. Constitution here in the United States says we have the freedom of religion in the United States, unalienable rights. Why would we support a government that denied Mexicans of their right of religion, their right to worship as they choose? Why would the U.S. government support a government that was trying to exterminate the Catholic Christians in Mexico? That's why we need to know this history. It's very important. This has been kind of buried. This needs to be taught in our schools. We need to learn Mexican history and what happened in Mexico. By 1929, U.S. President Herbert Hoover, another winner, I'm speaking sarcastically, followed Coolidge's example by maintaining an arms embargo that prevented any support to the Cristeros, who are simply fighting for the right to practice their Catholic faith and exist. President Herbert Hoover allowed the export of arms and ammunition to the anti-Catholic fascist government, federal totalitarian government of Mexico. The Mexican government was able to purchase 10,000 of the most modern rifles and innumerable amounts of ammunition from the U.S. government. President Gill called U.S. Ambassador Morrow and thanked him because he was able to purchase U.S. commercial planes and convert them for military use. Basically, it was a trade. The U.S. government would give them weapons to kill Catholics in exchange for oil rights. That was the concern of our government at the time. Was the concern was not losing our oil rights in Mexico. Moro was a very wealthy Wall Street person. The government in Mexico was this high society. Okay, they looked at as the Cristeros as peons, as lower people. And that the same thing with the people that associated with business in Mexico, from the United States. There were these, they thought they were the wealthy people that thought they were above the simple people of Mexico. U.S. pilots actually assisted the barbaric anti-Catholic government in Mexico. The best explanation for this unholy alliance is the leadership in Mexico and in the United States were Freemasons. While this policy created some debate in the United States, the flow of weapons to kill Catholics and priests continued throughout the war. Over 200,000 people were killed. The Cristeros were firmly established in 3 regions and actually set up its own government, its own currency, and they actually raised some taxes to help. They actually had a government. They had a little bit of taxes going. They were actually setting up this new government in Mexico. And this government, which I showed you on the map, spanned the entire west central region in Mexico. The people's resistance grew as government forces would pillage the poor. They would go onto these farms and take everything from the poor Mexican Catholics. By January 1929, military actions were so numerous that it became difficult to track. The war was at a stalemate, and government officials began to get worried. They began to say that all the efforts of the president to destroy the Catholic Church had been thwarted, and the resolution of the religious matter was critical. The government now saw the need to make peace with the church in order to disarm the Cristeros. So it was a sinister plan. Okay, let's make peace with the leadership of the Catholic Church, okay, in order to disarm the Cristeros. And I'll touch base on the next segment about what happened in the Second Cristiada. General Gorostieta kept the pressure on and ordered an offensive between March 3rd and May 15th of 1929, taking advantage of thinning federal soldiers and crushing the remaining auxiliary troops in the area. With these attacks, nearly the entire western zone, except for major cities, was under Cristero control. Gorostieta was wise. He wisely resisted the temptation to go into the cities that were filled with federal soldiers, which that could be a trap for the Cristero soldiers, so he avoided that. After General Gorostieta's successful attacks, Federal General Amaro lost his poise for the first time. Amaro ended up telling President Gil that that the West is completely up in arms, they don't have any control, and it would be vital to come to an agreement with the Church. The Knights of Columbus and the National Council of Catholic Women attempted to address U.S. President Coolidge, and U.S. Catholics, particularly Knights of Columbus, began to exert pressure on U.S. Congress to try to bring this to the American people's attention. Many of the American people weren't aware of what was happening, the atrocities just south of our border. The KKK supported the persecution of the Catholic Church. They sent telegrams to wicked dictator Calles, asking him repeatedly for the full annihilation of the Catholic Church south of the Rio Grande. Now, I call Calles a dictator. Supposedly they'd have an election and the president wasn't supposed to serve more than one term, but once Calles' term was expired or ran out, he became Jefe Maximo, like this supreme behind the scenes leader who controlled the military, so he would prop up the next president. But the next president, his successor, the next successor and the successor after him were loyal to Calles. He was in control, not the successors of President Calles for the next two successors. Not until the third successor, I believe, did that change. But the KKK sent telegrams to Calles asking for the full annihilation of the Catholic Church south of the Rio Grande. Remember, the KKK numbered about 2 million in the United States. Failed U.S. ambassador to Mexico, Sheffield, finally stepped down. This guy was a bum. He didn't know what. He had no concern about the atrocities. He was just there for a free ride, I guess, a free lunch. Did nothing to help the Catholic Church, in my opinion. On July 18th of 1927, the position fell to new ambassador Dwight Morrow, which gave hope for a settlement. His incentive was pretty much for business and finances. That's what he was concerned about the oil and mineral rights. That's why he was trying to get peace in Mexico. It was not after a concern of the Catholic Church being persecuted, in my opinion. After studying the situation in Mexico, Morrow met with Father John Burke of the National Catholic Welfare Council to discuss the religious question in Mexico. So he actually did meet with a Catholic priest by the name of Father Burke to try to come up with a peace settlement. Father Burke met with President Coolidge, who actually, he had no backbone. Okay, he feared direct interference in the religious crisis might lead to escalation and possibly a war with Mexico. And here he is supplying the government with all the weapons to kill Catholics. But he was afraid of escalating a confrontation with the government when he's supplying the government. Freemason background. His wife was a Freemason, I believe. Morrow, who made disparaging comments about poor Mexican Catholics, was the man chosen to set up a negotiation with Calles and Father Burke. Father Burke sent a letter to Calles on March 29, 1928, and Calles was impressed with Father Burke and decided to meet with him. So he actually had a good rapport. Father Burke was able to get a decent rapport with Calles to actually have a discussion, a conversation, even though Calles was a stubborn, bullheaded man. Many in the U.S. dislike, people in the United States, big segment, it was anti-Catholic back then and still is to this day. Remember, John F. Kennedy could barely run for president as a Catholic. So some Catholics in Mexico, they feared that U.S. intervention would de-Catholicize Mexico with Protestant, secular, and Masonic values. But many in the United States disliked contact with Catholic Mexico because the Americans in the United States feared that Protestant USA could become Catholicized. That's the problem with our immigration policy, is this historic fear of the United States becoming Catholicized. Too many Catholics in the United States, so prevent them from migrating or immigrating to the United States. So that's why there was very little support to help the persecuted Catholics in Mexico during the time of this war. On June 1st, 1929, General Gorostieta, just 20 days before the state and the church reached their accords through these negotiations, it was going to be like a peace settlement. Gorostieta sadly confided to a close friend, Manuelita. Poor Gorostieta. He sensed he wasn't going to receive the support of the church. He sensed it by these negotiations. So here's what he said to his friend Manuelito. Here's a quote from General Gorostieta. Quote, "They are selling us out, Manuelito. They are selling us out." They were going to leave him high and dry and cut off the support of the church. See, the Cristeros needed the backing of the ecclesial community, the backing of the bishops. At least the bishops were neutral, but if the bishops took away support from the general or the Cristeros, they could be left out there, hung out to dry. And that's what happened to Gorostieta. He felt that was going to happen. So kind of divine providence. It's a sad story, but the following day after he told his friend Manuelito that they're selling us out, the following day General Gorostieta was killed when federal soldiers ambushed him with a small group of 15 Cristero men. Since it was dangerous to travel in the open during the day, Gorostieta would have a small amount of troops around him to not draw attention, and they would go to seek refuge during the day so that they weren't out in the open. So Gorostieta, he went to a small area, a small building, small area, and a small building actually, to wait for nightfall. He was surprised. Federal troops arrived and surrounded them, surprised him. Gorostieta was able to mount his horse, but his horse was shot while some of his group were able to escape. General Gorostieta died in a shootout with the federal soldiers, causing some to wonder if he was betrayed. So did somebody rat him out, hey, the general's over there, there's Cristero soldiers over there? That's possible. But the federal soldiers were not aware that they had killed General Gorostieta. And so they realized it later. What they did is they took his picture to show proof that they killed him. In June of 1929, 50,000 Cristero soldiers were fighting when the government and church made a peace accord. The main concern of Rome and some bishops was the ability to assume worship in Mexico. Cristeros were promised amnesty, and 14,000 laid down their arms. The war ended as it began, with the Cristeros going back to their homes. So they laid down their arms. Once the church reached an accord, many Cristeros just laid their arms down. They went back to their homes, and 14,000 Cristeros, in good faith, gave up their arms in obedience to the church. The government promised Cristeros amnesty. Church property was never given back to the church, and a few years later, the anti-clerical government of Mexico hunted down and killed all Cristero leadership. So the federal government backstabbed the Cristeros. They made this peace accord to allow the government to regroup. And then once the Cristeros laid their arms down, they went and slaughtered, they hunted down all the Cristero leadership and killed them all. And Cristero soldiers too, they hunted them down and killed them. The federal government used the peace accord to rebuild its forces, and then they added cavalry, because that was their weakness. They added cavalry. They added aircraft, advanced aircraft. They improved their railways. They also added radios that they got from the United States to brutalize and kill Cristeros throughout Mexico. Horrible, brutal executions and torture of the poor Cristero soldiers that obeyed the church and laid down their arms. And that's why General Gorostieta was saying, they're selling us out, Manuelito. They're selling us out. He was concerned about not himself, but his troops, his army, that they would be hung out to dry like that. Never had an insurgent movement faced such a strong military backed by the U.S. government. With few resources. So they have few resources. They can't get any weapons from the United States. They have to have the Women's Brigade smuggle whatever ammunition they could get, and they took the federal government on. The Masonic, totalitarian, fascist government of Mexico, the anti-Catholic government of Mexico, and Gorostieta and the Cristeros took him to a stalemate. Gorostieta, if he lived, he wanted to go much further than that. He was not going to surrender. Never had an insurgent movement in Mexico had been this successful. The peaceful cessation of resistance and obedience to the church actually surprised the U.S. military attaché in Mexico. He was so surprised. Boy, I can't believe they laid down their arms once the bishop advised him to do that. In 3 years, 90,000 combatants died, including 12 generals, 70 colonels, 1,800 officers, and 40,000 federal soldiers. There was an estimated 200,000 deaths. Many innocent people died and murdered and tortured and beaten for simply being Catholics. These poor Indian Catholics killed for no reason, just for being Catholic. May General Gorostieta rest in peace. We thank him for his service. We're sorry that happened to you. Viva Cristo Rey! Que viva! Viva Cristo Rey! Que viva! Peace be with you.